Come to this panel, and I would like just to have a short introduction of that, and after that I will go through the development of this panel. So, as I've been introduced, I'm the retired Lieutenant General Theo Toader. I've been the former Deputy Chief of Defense and the former military representative of Romania to the Military Committee of NATO and the EU. And I have the great honor to be joined today by four distinguished panelists that are coming from France, United Kingdom, US, and Germany. So I have the pleasure today to have with me Mr. Emmanuel DUPUY, who is the president of the Institute for European Perspective and Security in France.
In Europe?
In Europe, yeah, in France, in Europe, in France. And also he's a professor in geopolitics and a researcher in geopolitical issues for various institutions like the French defense policy. And linked to the French defense policy, we have retired General Sir James Everard, who is the former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe and also a former Deputy Chief of Defense of the UK Armed Forces. And the next one is the retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who is the former commander of NATO Allied Land Command in Izmir, and also the former Commanding General of United States Army Europe in Wiesbaden, and who prior had the chair for the Persian chair of the strategic studies at the Center for European Policy Analysis. And last but not least, we have Dr. Liviu HOROVITZ, who's the head of the project STAND in Germany, which is coming from a strategic threat analysis and nuclear disorder, and an associate in the research group International Security, and currently working for SWP, which is a German Institute for International and Security Affairs. So these are the four distinguished panelists that we have here on the stage. And as introductory remarks, I would like to have a few minutes on underlying a few of the points. So first, this panel builds on a topic that for a long time in Europe, a lot of people didn't prefer to talk about too much, at least not outside of the specialist cycles. So for decades, the basic architecture seemed simple, almost taken for granted. The ultimate guarantee of European security, the last resort against any existential threat, was the American nuclear umbrella, backed and complemented also by the British and French forces and embedded in the NATO's integrated planning. The essence of the transatlantic nuclear setup was that the United States extended its nuclear deterrent to Europe. The European states accepted non-proliferation and relied on that guarantee. And NATO's nuclear posture provided the political signal and that any attack on any ally would face a response from the whole alliance. So for most of the post-Cold War period, that arrangement was rarely questioned in the public. Nuclear deterrence was there somewhere in the background as a kind of strategic constant. We talked more about expeditionary operations out of NATO area of responsibility, about conflict prevention and crisis management, about peace operations, about the enlargement of NATO, as well as about strategic concept, principles, and values. Today, however, the context has changed dramatically. First, Russia's full-scale invasion in Ukraine has brought major war back to Europe and renuclearized our strategic thinking. Moscow has used nuclear rhetoric and coercion deliberately, not to wage nuclear war, but to shape the conventional battlefield and to limit Western support to Ukraine. Second, the erosion of arms control. From the end of the INF Treaty to the uncertainty around New START and the modernization and diversification of nuclear arsenals in Russia and China raise fundamental questions about the deterrence will look alike and how this will look like in a multipolar nuclear world. Third, and the last one for the moment, we cannot ignore the uncertainties in American domestic politics. While the United States remains today firmly committed to European defense, the debate in Washington about priorities, burden sharing, global focus has become more intense. So at this moment, we as Europeans may have two basic questions. First, what if at some point US nuclear guarantee became less predictable? And the second one, what if the political will to support ultimate European security will become more conditional? These are difficult questions at this moment. This panel sits at the intersection of these questions. And in order to clarify some of the aspects, not to have any intention to clarify it 100%, we have, I will invite now our distinguished panelists to take the floor in a row to discuss on this aspect, to have their introductory remarks, and after that we will build upon question and answer, either from the audience or from myself. So I would like first to to offer the floor to Emmanuel DUPUY. First and foremost, because in Europe it was a new concept launched for quite a long time ago, the strategic autonomy. And because this was initially approached as development of the conventional capabilities, however, at the beginning of this year, the discussion started on the European nuclear umbrella. So, Emmanuel, please, your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Vasile. Of course, I'm not speaking on behalf of any French official position, but it is my duty to just maybe make it a bit clearer of what is now and what is not a change in our nuclear doctrine. In 1962, General de Gaulle made it very clear that the nuclear deterrence of France is the protection of our territory, and of course, which cannot be separated from the one of our neighbors, mainly the ones who were in the same perspective as the European integration, of course, Spain, Belgium, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy. As the European Union has grown bigger, our neighbors are grown more and more, and then we have to assume the fact that we have to protect a wider territory. This is why the forward deterrence strategy, which was proposed and presented by Emmanuel Macron the 2 of March 2026, offers not a new perspective, but allows the Europeans to understand better what is the nuclear deterrence of France. And if you look at the countries who are associated, Great Britain, Germany, Poland, Netherlands, Belgium, Greece, Sweden, and Denmark, let me just focus on the three, not major, but I mean the three on which there is a huge amount of new realities. First of all, leaning to my right, after the Lancaster House agreement in 2010, after the Farnborough meeting in July 2025, let's have in mind that we have a Lancaster House 2.0 with more coordination, more cooperation, mainly on the nuclear deterrence naval capacity. When it comes to Germany, there's been a huge amount of narrative. Germany is presented as the key partner, and this will lead, I hope, or we are witnessing that, the creation of a Franco-Germany monitoring group. May we see it as the core of a EU nuclear planning group outside of NATO, maybe. Let's discuss on that. And of course, Poland, after the meeting, the summit between Emmanuel Macron and Donald Tusk in Gdansk, bringing two very interesting perspectives. First, a joint exercise momentum and the possibility to deploy air capacity Rafale airplanes with the new SMP missile, the new ASN, fourth generation of our nuclear missiles. Let me just also focus maybe on three linear remarks about what is new or what is perceived as a new dimension or a new philosophy of France. First of all, I think it's important, as we have contenders and we have adversaries who are looking very precisely of what we're saying and what we're doing and what we're presenting, we need to bring out strategic ambiguity. We have to complicate the credibility of what we're saying to our adversary. And this is why I think Emmanuel Macron is right in now, in the future, not giving the exact numbers nor the specificity and of course the capabilities of our nuclear capacity, which was not the case in the past. Second point, and I think this was mentioned by Ambassador Ischinger this morning, the European nuclear umbrella is complementary and not substitutive of what already exists. This was said at the NATO summit in Ottawa in 1974. The nuclear deterrence of Europe is based on three pillars: United States, Great Britain and France. That hasn't changed since that period. Third posture, there isn't a change in the intangible principle of the decision-making process. That is to say, in a nutshell, the only one who can decide the use of French nuclear capacity is the President of France, regardless of the fact that nuclear capacity may be deployed in Poland or elsewhere. Let me also maybe very rapidly, or you want me to, in 2 or 3 minutes, give some other preliminary thoughts about the strategic environment, which I think explains the change of doctrine, or at least the perception of the change of doctrine through 4 strategic streams. The disinhibition use of force. Let's have this in reality when it comes to Putin hubris in Ukraine. The post-1945 international order, bringing a normality in the use of force and not anymore the exception, in the context of a dronization, robotization, hypervelocity, new ballistic approach. We have to tackle more and more small objects when anti-ballistic missile capacity were to deter big and ICBM in the past. This is my second point. My third point: informative warfare is polarizing a threat perception through hybrid warfare conflictuality, and of course this has to be taken in consideration. How and if we were to use the capacity of a nuclear deterrent or as well as a conventional deterrent. Last but not least, climate change, scramble for energy and minerals have aggravated all of the crises that we have to tackle, and this is why we should have in mind that if we were to build a more robust nuclear deterrence, we must not forget that to be credible, and this is absolutely the case in Ukraine, we also have to have a robust conventional deterrence, because we are fighting high and long intensity warfare. I will stick to that for my preliminary remarks, and then I will come back afterwards.
Very much appreciated your introductory remarks, Emmanuel. I will go next to General Sir Everard. Now it's your turn, sir, for opening remarks. Please focus a bit on how solid is the transatlantic nuclear umbrella today.
Well, I'm going to start by saying I think it's good that we're talking about nuclear weapons. You made that point, General Vasile. You know, these are more political weapons than military weapons, but for too long they have been a Voldemort subject. And to explain, Voldemort is the darkest character in the Harry Potter series. greatly feared, so much so his name was never spoken, and this is where nuclear has been, and this is now changed, and I think that's a good thing. Why? Well, I think first of all, Russia is not a crisis that is going to pass, and the use of nuclear weapons and non-strategic nuclear weapons remain a central component of Russian thinking for strategic deterrence, for the defense of Russia, and that might look very offensive to us, as well as an instrument of coercion. So point one. Point two, Europe is concerned about the reliability of the US and by extension the US nuclear umbrella. As an aside, I'm not concerned. You see that in 2010, 18, 21, the US Nuclear Posture Review all argued for a strengthening of extended deterrence, and the 2026 NSS did not contradict that. And of course you see an increase in the number of non-strategic nuclear weapons flowing into Europe at the moment, which is good. Third, we've heard France, under President Macron's initiative, an advanced deterrent framework designed, I think, to make nuclear forces more relevant to their European allies. We've heard about that. I think that's good. In the UK have committed and are modernising their nuclear deterrent. It's worth reminding people that since April 1969, the UK have had a SSBN, a ship submersible ballistic nuclear, a city destroyer at sea, every day. We're now modernising that fleet with the new Dreadnought class. We're also purchasing, as you know, the F-35 Alpha and integrating ourselves into the NATO dual-capable aircraft mission set. And of course, the UK would say that this is an independent and credible nuclear deterrent assigned to NATO. Lastly, I think, and I added this, having read the very good essay in the Black Swans book, nuclear proliferation, I think nations realise that ultimately they are safe if they have nuclear weapons, and I think that essay by Robert Hamilton is well worth reading. Very quickly, of course, for the US, UK, France, as we've heard, the launch of a missile remains a decision under sovereign control. But when I look at the US umbrella and the increase of the number of non-strategic nuclear weapons into Europe, over 7,000 in 1979, and we're not building to anything like that, but enough to deter, align with France's extended nuclear deterrence, align with UK's modernised nuclear deterrent. I think we have a very good strengthened nuclear posture. I think it increases ambiguity. I think it increases Russian decision-making and makes it more complex. And do you have concerns? Well, I hear people are concerned that France is the only NATO member that doesn't sit in the nuclear planning group. Nor does France really take part in nuclear NATO exercises. But as we've heard, these systems have always been designed to be complementary, so I think that is okay. And I do not worry about the transatlantic umbrella. I think it is rock solid, and I think we can proceed on the basis of good faith on that. I do think in the end we need to message what we're doing to Russia so they clearly understand what we're doing and that we have strengthened our deterrence. But overall, I think the picture on nuclear is better than it was over the previous 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Very much appreciated. I will now turn to General Hodges. And as a long-living in Europe American, I would like to firstly, and from the very beginning, ask you how we balance the transatlantic assurance with the European ambition in a responsible way.
So I don't often agree with my old friend James Carafano, but in the previous panel, he rejected the idea that the United States is leaving Europe. And I completely agree with that. The United States is not leaving Europe. I don't like the language that comes from the White House, the way it's delivered, the confusing signals that come out of the White House. I think it's terrible. It's unhelpful. But the fact is, Europe is America's most important trading partner as a bloc. So from a White House that is almost purely transactional in everything it thinks about. It is in the interest of the United States that Europe is prosperous, which means it has to be stable and secure. And that's one of the main reasons I think that the idea that the United States would leave or that it would somehow withdraw from NATO, or more to the point of this panel, that it would withdraw, that we would withdraw our nuclear deterrent, I just think it's very, very unlikely. Obviously, I can't guarantee it. I wish I were in a position to guarantee that, but that's my assessment. It's just very, very unlikely because it's clearly not in our interest. And fortunately, most of the Congress, including the Republican leadership of the Congress, understands this very well, that it is in America's interest to stay fully integrated in NATO and to protect our interests that are all over Europe. So that's up front. The second thing I would want to say up front is a reminder about deterrence. And both of my the two panel colleagues alluded to this. Deterrence is about having capability and the demonstrated will to use that capability. So having nuclear capability and making it very clear specifically to the Russians that we are prepared to use it is the essential nature of, is essential to the nature of a nuclear deterrent. But I would also say that you don't actually have to have a nuclear weapon, particularly a tactical nuclear weapon, with the modern systems that are available today, ballistic missiles, different types of warheads, the ability to strike deep at critical targets. So the Russians just need to believe that if they were to use a nuclear weapon of some sort, or threatening to, they need to believe that there would be ballistic missiles of some type raining down on Kaliningrad, St. Petersburg, Kola Peninsula, or other places that are of huge value. Now we, the United States, I think, made a terrible mistake during the Biden administration when it comes to Ukraine, and specifically to giving in to Russian threats about the possible use of a nuclear weapon. In my view, in 1,000 years, Russia is never going to use a nuclear weapon against Ukraine. Not because of a moral reluctance, but because there's no value for them. They would have achieved nothing for Russia to use a nuclear weapon. In the Cold War days, when General Havrillov was a young officer and the Soviet Union was going to break through the Fulda Gap, they had thousands of troops that were properly trained and equipped to operate in a contaminated environment. And so they would use a tactical nuclear weapon that would have blown a hole in NATO defenses there in Fulda, or maybe up on the North German plain, and then there would be thousands of troops going through to exploit that gap in the right equipment and training. That doesn't exist anymore. There are no regiments and BMPs that are overpressure that could allow soldiers to operate in a contaminated environment, so there's no way to exploit it. And also there's no place. I mean, there is no Fulda Gap kind of place in Ukraine where the Russians could burst through. And so I kept thinking, why are we so goddamn worried that Russia might use a nuclear weapon? And of course, the Russians could see how we, the Biden administration, now by the way, as a retired person, I have zero responsibility except to do what my wife tells me to do. So the President of the United States, of course, has all this pressure on him to make sure that a nuclear war does not start because of something he did. But I think the Russians could see how the White House and others, Germany and other countries, reacted to, like, oh my God, every time a drunk Medvedev came out and talked about a nuclear weapon against London or Warsaw, or they would announce, we're doing a nuclear exercise with Belarus. This was all to get the headline, and get us worried about it, and to remind us, hey, they have nuclear weapons. And what should have been happening, President Biden should have been saying, every time they threaten, say, you know what, we have thousands of nuclear weapons, and if you even think about seriously doing that, we're going to make Kaliningrad disappear, or we're going to hit everything, every Russian asset outside of Russia. We're going to destroy it. And by the way, every time you threaten, that's another boatload of artillery ammunition that is headed to Ukraine. That's how we should have pushed back on that, and we didn't. The last thing I'd say, and I think General Everard could articulate this better, it is very, very, very expensive to maintain nuclear weapons. So the idea of Europe, any other European country, having nuclear weapons, if you don't already have it, it is very, very, very expensive. I mean, like in tens of billions, many, many billions of euro to do this. And so I would look for alternatives, or make sure that your policy should be to make sure that the United States doesn't walk away. And also to work closely. I think the Germans have reached out to the French, which is a good approach, to find ways to maybe augment or supplement or even help pay for some of that. Over.
I might just add, so Ben mentioned expense. UK spend about £64 billion on defence. 25% of that goes on nuclear. 50% of the equipment programme is nuclear.
Okay. Thank you very much, General Hodges. I would like now to turn to Dr. HOROVITZ. Please present your opening remarks, and I would kindly ask you also to focus on the on how do you think that the transatlantic nuclear setup stands today, and how Europe should think about this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me here. Thank you for the organizers. It's a pleasure to be at the conference. As you can hear, I talk to way too many people because it's such a good conference, and now my voice is giving up. And it's a pleasure to be here. I was born in Romania, so it's coming home is always great. Let me start with the question. So I'll give you, I thought this is a very hard act to follow, so I'll give you 3 points. Now I have +1, which is the German perspective. So if you think nuclear topics were, so the Germans were very good at reading Harry Potter. They really believe in Voldemort. So he shall not be named, and nuclear policy shall never be ever mentioned in a meeting. That was the truth for many years, which also meant that there was not much expertise going around, especially when it came to nuclear deterrence. My argument in the 3 points I'm going to give you is that things are probably not going to go in the right direction in the future, and hence it's probably good for countries like Romania and Germany to build up the expertise to at least understand what's going on. So the first point on that, I am actually worried, and not so much that the Americans will go away, but I'm worried how the Russians will perceive various steps. Because at the end of the day, that's the problem, and that's what people, I know it's easier, and I will say I think it's much easier if you sit in Paris, in London, and in Washington to say, don't you worry. It's much harder not to worry when you sit in Berlin or in other places, because you don't have nuclear weapons, and hence you have to rely on extended deterrence. So the first point is, a lot of what we see in the nuclear order is the Americans enforcing it. You know, enforcing deterrence, as General Hodges said, deterring, actually doing the action, which has been weakening. We've seen a lot of the nuclear order is bid on protecting allies. That is still there, but it is weaker. We can argue as much as possible, you know, we can sit in meetings and say everything's all right. Well, maybe it is, but maybe not fully. And the third is the non-proliferation element of it, which, again, the US government was extremely committed to various instruments to pursuing non-proliferation. Now it's very committed to using force as a final means, but you know, where is this going? So the bottom line here is probably it's not going to go rosy. So we'd better buckle up. And the first to buckle up is to actually understand what's going on. So please invest in some people who know about this. That's the first point. The second point is on this question of, that was also discussed this morning, of France versus the United States. Please stop that, is my second point. This is really not about either or. All that is on the table is complementary measures. That's what we're talking. Complementing US extended deterrence with various European European means. There is no appetite at this point in time anywhere, I would argue, in Europe for alternatives, for the simple reason that it's A, very expensive, that has been named, but it's also extremely risky. If you start, there are options out there, we'll talk in a second, but they are risky. And last but not least, the ones that maybe are more palatable from a military perspective, they're politically unappealing, further integration. So I've been working for a year with various European experts to put out a report at the Munich Security Conference on what are the alternatives. And then we went and we briefed politicians and everybody said, oh, but this is impossible and the other one is impossible. Okay, so if everything else is impossible, then we're stuck with the status quo plus and hoping that it works. Now on that plus, and this is my third point. We are doing the plus, but we don't do enough. That's my last. So what does it mean? So the plus is how to strengthen the European pillar of deterrence, the nuclear component in Europe. And we take a number of political steps. More exercises, more communiques, more dialogues with France and Britain, Germany and France, etc., etc., etc. That's okay, that's one component. Then we have a small military component of strengthening French deterrence. At the end, we plan at some point, maybe it's possible to disperse better French air assets and hence to make them more survivable, although the argument is they're already survivable, so the question there. But then is the third aspect that President Macron talked about in his speech, and that is us Europeans managing escalation. And that, in order to be credible in doing that, we are not just having to buy some assets, but we also have to talk to each other and coordinate how we're going to use them and when, in order to be credible and hence to deter. Those things don't deter just because you buy them. We seem to be, at least some of us, pretty good at having contracts to buy them, but not really good at, or at least, well, we'll see how good we are, but at least we're trying. But in terms of thinking hard about how we're going to deter with those tools, well, I think that we're lagging strongly in what the United States is working, at least from my small window of where I'm working. Maybe there are other people who are smarter, and I'm happy to learn that is actually the case. So, thank you very much. Again, the bottom line is I think we need more expertise, and I'm really glad that we're having these discussions because that's the first step towards advancing these debates and hopefully getting more people interested in them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Horowitz. I will start now challenging our panelists today with some of the questions. Whenever from the audience the question is prepared, please raise your hands to let me see and give you the floor. So, okay, we have one, please.
Hello, my name is Mihail Dian.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for Mr. Horowitz about European strategic autonomy and whether European defense should have a nuclear dimension, a stronger, more common nuclear dimension. Because you spoke about credibility, and a strategic autonomy whose only conventional is not strategic by definition. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm definitely sure I'm not the only one on this panel who can answer or who has views on this, so just let me give you one. So the question there is, sure, but in theory, that's a good idea. In practice, that means that you need who's going to push the button? Who's going to control those weapons? For the moment, you have two independent centers of decisions in Europe. One is within the European Union, one is outside the European Union. And the argument would be, well, you have to integrate that in some European framework. Well, do you want Ursula von der Leyen to command nuclear weapons? Who should do it? What is the framework to do it? We had a working group on this, and there are scenarios. You can build out, the European army, who then has both conventional and so on. So, as an academic, I would say this is definitely developable, but of course whenever you bring that to politics, they say, well, better informed people than me say this is decades away. Now this is the situation where we are right now. Probably easier from a technical military perspective, very hard from a political perspective. That's probably but at least my 2 cents on this. But
okay, thank you.
Yeah, to be complementary to what was said, I think it's very important to enhance the fact that there is now a debate concerning academicians, think tanks, but of course it's now a policy debate as the president of the EU Commission has launched the idea of a white paper, a European white paper, in the package, the defense package with ReArm 2030, and nuclear deterrence will be discussed on that perspective. But I think there's one debate that we haven't managed yet to put thoughtfully on the table is the burden sharing. Because if we were to be complementary with Great Britain, which is not part of the European Union anymore, then who will pay? And I think if you take in consideration the grand bazooka that the German Bundeswehr has put in emphasis with Boris Pistorius, saying that there's going to be 100 billion euros for defense, then if we have more complementary exercises, joint capability, at one point we have to discuss who will pay the burden. My colleague, Sir Everett, spoke about the 25-30% of what cost. For France, it's 13% of the budget of the next programmation law. 20% of the equipment that we spent is on nuclear, and if we take all of our nuclear assets, it's 400 billion of euros. So it's a huge amount of money, which we'll be very willing to share. Let's not push this question aside, and of course this is also based on the fact that I think it's something we always forget, that the defense of Europe is not only the territorial defense of Europe. France, as member of the European Union, is defending Europe on 4 continents and on 3 seas. And what is the protection and the security of France, I will add the security of Great Britain, is not only in the continental Europe, but worldwide. So we need to have this in mind as we are facing new competitors. We are speaking about Russia, but let's not forget that there is a strategic surprise when a few weeks ago Iran sent 2 ICBM in the direction of Chagos Island on 4,000 kilometers, bringing out a bit of strategic surprise that now all of Europe and London can be sometime or somehow targeted by Iran. So we have to take into consideration it's not only to deter Russia, but it's to deter the future contenders that we may have.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Can I make one very brief? I think it's a good question. And I said yesterday, the trick for Europe, I think, is to deepen our relationship with the US while also decoupling for the US. And one of the areas you deepen is in nuclear, strategic and non-strategic nuclear weapons. And for me, one of the areas you decouple is in conventional space. But I think that can be done. I think it can be complementary. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? If not, please let me come back to you, Emmanuel, because I'm really interested in hearing your opinion. It was mentioned by Sir Everard that France is not part of the NPG in NATO, however, is participating in the exercises and in consultation as well. The thing that now expanded this or giving this subject of discussions on strategic autonomy or extending, creating or extending the European nuclear umbrella. To what extent do you think that France will be available to share part of this capability? Because at a certain point, you need to look for consultation, for political guarantees, even for cost sharing, and we have to look that at a certain moment this capability would not be only for France's interest, it will be for European interest. To what extent France it will be willing to give up some of these national objectives in order to extend this umbrella over Europe?
I don't see a difference between a French objective and objective of defending Europe. It's correlated. France will not have to avoid or elude a certain number of its objectives. I think this is what was said since the beginning with General de Gaulle in 1962 and re-said throughout all of the speeches of the former president who spoke about nuclear deterrence, Nicolas Sarkozy in 2010 and President Macron in the 26th of March speech in Brest. I think what is important is are we sure that we have the same definition of our strategic objectives? Are we sure that we have the same definition about our vital vital assets, or are we sure, because we haven't had since 2003 with the Solana package, a clear definition of what is the capabilities, what are the capabilities, and what we stand and what we are willing to defend altogether. Are we sure that we're going to defend it by 27? Absolutely not when it comes to deterrence, because at least 3 EU countries have signed the nuclear ban treaty in 2017, namely Ireland, Cyprus, and Austria. So that's 27 minus 3. And of course, none of the countries are part of the non-proliferation treaty, and France, by the way, only joined in 1992 when it was launched in 1968. So I think we should have and take the momentum of Readiness 2030, of the defense package, of having a white paper to define, or to define altogether, on what we can commit, with which type of with deterrence. The former Chief of Staff, Thierry Burkhardt, spoke about the idea of winning the war before the war, and that there are non-conventional deterrence capability, but not only nuclear capability. We have to work on influence, we have to work on counter narratives, we have to work on cyber, so forth and so on. So I think it's very important to just take the time to discuss about this issue, and of course I'm very happy that it is an open debate. For a long time it has been a strategic debate and therefore a closed door debate. Now we have to open this debate also with our public opinion. I'm not sure that all of the a majority of the public opinion in France is on the same track as a certain number of political leaders on this question.
Okay, thank you very much. I will turn now to General Hodges, trying to ask him a question on the extension of the nuclear umbrella over the Ukraine, because we witnessed the previous panel speaking about the coalition of willing, and when we will have this kind of task force and deployed in Ukraine, we may say, yes, there will be plenty of challenges. And we know from the military point of view how many challenges they are, starting with all the planning gamut, with the deployment cost, the sustainment cost, the rules of engagement, and so on. And obviously the narrative from the Russian side saying that it is a huge step in escalation. So do you think that in order to give good guarantees to Ukraine and also to protect Ukraine as well as our coalition of willing, would it be good to extend the transatlantic nuclear umbrella over the Ukraine? And this question will be also, I would like also, if it's possible, for Sir James Everard to answer.
So NATO will get better the second that Ukraine becomes a member of the alliance. Just like we got better the second that Finnish flag went up in Brussels, and then when the Swedish flag went up, we got better immediately because of quality troops, strong society, strong defense industry. So I look forward to the day when Ukraine becomes a member of the alliance, and then of course this nuclear deterrent would be extended to cover Ukraine, but I know that's not your question. I think, to be realistic, politically, it's hard to imagine that that the alliance, or that the U.S., at least with this administration and actually the previous administration, would do that. What's necessary is that the administration, the U.S. administration and others, need to get straight in our heads what is our strategic objective when it comes to Ukraine. What are we trying to accomplish? I mean, providing ammunition or support or all the different things, this is not charity. It's in our interest to do it, but our political leaders, at least President Biden and President Trump, never say that. They don't talk in terms of strategic objective. And instead, particularly the last administration seemed scared of Russia. This administration seems to support Russia. Instead of saying, I'm tired of always worrying about what the Russians might do. Instead, they should be fucking scared every day that Europe is going to get really pissed off at them, or that the U.S. is going to be very angry at them. They're the ones that should be worried about provoking us, instead of us always worrying about, oh, the Russians might get angry or they might do something. And I think whatever we do to help protect innocent Ukrainians, or in your scenario, which I think people don't think about, if there's ever going to be a peacekeeping force or some kind of a force that goes into Ukraine, it will have to go in there fully armed, ready, with air and missile defense and the right rules of engagement, because if they don't have that, and all the political will behind that, then the Russians, of course, will test it in the first hours, and they'll start having drones, and they'll be taking shots, and they'll find out whether or not we're serious. So it's not just about a nuclear deterrent, but it's also air and missile defense, so that Captain Everard, when he sees a Russian drone flying over his British soldiers there that are part of a peacekeeping force, he will not have to call back to Brussels or London for permission, but he'll immediately be launching counterfire. That's what we're going to have.
Captain Everard. I think nuclear would be the ultimate security guarantee, but I don't think it's credible that the US would see it in its national interest to extend the cover over Ukraine now. Yes, as Ben said, if Ukraine became a NATO member, which I very much hope it will do, then naturally that extension would follow. But I also think you don't need a nuclear umbrella, because the power of conventional weapons, their range and the lethality of their warheads means that you can have a conventional response that offers a genuine deterrent to Russia to ensure the peace, if it starts, is preserved.
Thank you. Dr. Horowitz, I'm coming back to you with practically a very simple question now. In the context of the war in Ukraine, do you consider that NATO's current nuclear architecture is sufficient to deter Russia on the long run, or do you see the need for adjustment, including with regard to the nuclear presence in Europe? Adjustment, increasing of the nuclear presence in Europe.
Yeah, if that's what you call a simple question, then I really don't want to have the hard one. I'll definitely fail your exams. So I think the question unavoidably has two dimensions. One is, within the current framework, under the assumption that the current framework holds, how do we make it better? And the other one is under the assumption that the current framework might be fraying, how we prepare for a different one. So I think the second is way harder and way more expensive. So let's stick with the easy. I'll interpret it in the easy approach. So then the question becomes, okay, what helps? How to do this within NATO? NATO has consistently expanded the number of countries that basically help the nuclear mission being delivered, and that has become better and better. So I think there we're on the right track. However, in this NATO nuclear sharing mission, we do, the United States deploys gravity bombs that are, they just got refurbished, but they are still gravity bombs. So we put gravity bombs on a very, very good jet. Well, that's probably not the smartest idea. So there are currently discussions within NATO to put a standoff option. However, we have to be aware that if a decision is being taken tomorrow, it's probably going to take 15 years for that thing to come online. So I think this is where the discussions are within NATO at this point in time. I think it's a very good idea to go in that direction. And to answer the other part of your question, I don't, nuclear sharing is mainly a political process. We're mainly relying on the United States and on its strategic nuclear arsenal and on its conventional options to sustain its counter-force damage limitation option, and hence the limited role that nuclear sharing is playing should really not be overstated. I know this is geeky nuclear talk, but it's important at the end of the day. It's not those weapons in Europe that mainly defend us. It's those weapons in the United States that mainly defend us and on the high seas. So hence, whether we put some more of those weapons in various European countries, that's mainly a political step, and that comes with costs. So there are plenty of trade-offs, both at the political and at the military level, that they cannot be answered with, yeah, it's a great idea. It has cost, and the benefits are, at the end of the day, marginal. They're mainly political. So yes, countries are pushing for that, and I think for good reason, but whether that's such a smart policy choice, I don't know.
Thank you. Emmanuel, let me come back to you with one question.
Simple question?
Another simple question, yeah. And it's mainly for France. What are, in your opinion, the red lines that France would not accept in a kind of possible European nuclear umbrella arrangement? And, obviously these are probably under discussion at this moment, but let's think a bit about the joint control that is not really aligned with the purpose of your nuclear capabilities, and also the involvement of the EU as an institution. Normally, EU doesn't have responsibilities on the nuclear domain, nuclear capabilities, but thinking about the strategic autonomy, thinking about the European nuclear umbrella, and the role France may play in this one, what do you think could be the red lines?
Again, simple question, but no, of course, not speaking on behalf of France, but maybe focus on maybe 2 points that your question raises. First of all, there is a red line that will be never crossed. It has been said by all of the presidents since we are a deterrent, we have a deterrent capability, is the sharing of the decision, the final decision made. And this is important because we have to assess that if we are a nuclear dotated country, our opinion must accept that. And I do believe that in the French debate today, this question is a taboo question, and no one would agree to give to another country the responsibility to decide whether or not to use a nuclear weapon. Second of all, you mentioned it, at the format or the frame. It cannot be the European Union, because we have a certain number of security agreements outside the European Union, Lancaster House in 2010, Farnborough July 2025, and let's also not forget that we have a certain number of agreements, bilateral agreements with certain of our partners. The Nancy agreement with Poland, the Quirinal agreement with Italy, the Barcelona agreement with Spain, and this engages us with a certain sense of responsibility. Maybe the Yazd treaty we have been discussing with some of your colleagues between France and Romania, still to be implemented, of course. And of course, let's not forget that each of our country, I will speak on France, but I'm quite sure that Great Britain has the same perspective. We are also linked to security agreements that we have with other countries outside of the European Union, with the Gulf countries, for example. We are linked to a certain number of other, let's say, fraternity, because we are not only founding members of NATO and the European Union, but we are also in a francophone capability. We have a certain number of our friends throughout the world, and of course this obliges us to be very legitimate on the fact that it must be a debate at 2 levels and maybe not at 27 plus 1 level. Second of all, I do engage and do quote again the fact that we are living in a very contradictory period in which on one side public opinion is calling for denuclearization, demilitarization. In 2017 there was a nuclear weapon ban treaty which is now implemented by 99 of the 194 members of the United Nations, by the way, not Cyprus but Malta, Ireland, Austria and Malta, and that obliges us to have an evolution on the way we are only thinking about our security through nuclear deterrence. We must be more and more implicated in conventional deterrence, and I think this is very important because when it comes to protect Ukraine, that is the bazooka that I was speaking of, not the nuclear capacity.
Okay, thank you very much, Emmanuel. Sir James, let me turn back to you. I could not spare you of a simple question as well. So, in the event of a kind of disruption of the American engagement, do you see an increased role of British and France, of UK and France, in maintaining the credibility of the nuclear umbrella over Europe? And if so, in what kind of political conditions? You know, with your role as DSACEUR, I think you are very accustomed with a lot of hypotheses.
I think if for any reason the primary leg of the three-legged stool was removed and the US for some reason said it was not going to extend its nuclear umbrella to Europe, then I think France and UK have enough capability to continue the deterrence as it stands. But I think that decision-making would have to remain within the NATO fold. I mean, I was an operational commander in the European Union working to the Policy and Security Committee, and I don't think that is the committee that has the education to take decisions on nuclear decisions. And I'd be happier to leave that to the Nuclear Planning Group, who train and practice and rehearse for that very scenario.
But even with the Nuclear Planning Group, the decision, as Emmanuel mentioned before...
Well, but perhaps if there were just two of us in the pie, would have to do it differently.
Sure. Thank you. And now looking into the audience to find another simple question. No simple questions from the audience. I have another one for you, for all of you here. And as I mentioned from the very beginning in my introductory remarks, with the erosion of the arms control and with the idea of strategic autonomy, creating an European nuclear umbrella or even extend it to Ukraine if it's necessary, do you think that we are heading to a kind of nuclear disorder? Dr. Horowitz, disorder is for you, mainly.
No, I just think the nuclear disorder comes from proliferation. It doesn't come from the stable frameworks that we have at the moment. But I come back to that chapter. I think it's very interesting that as nations perceive that nuclear gives them an ultimate guarantee of their security, more nations will seek to become nuclear.
I think that what's got to be addressed is China, of course, and North Korea. A U.S.-Russia only or NATO-Russia only arms control protocols is not going to be acceptable to the United States anymore. And this would be one of the very few times I agreed with the Trump administration that if China is not going to be a part of it, how can the United States limit itself when China and North Korea obviously are serious nuclear threats? So I think that would have to be somehow included in whatever comes next in terms of arms control.
Well, as a card-carrying member of what has been termed the sky is still falling profession, I'm quite worried to say that it's going to be worse, because people have been wrong in the past, but the signs on the wall are just not very good. I mean, China is massively expanding its nuclear arsenal in order to achieve political aims. Russia is modernizing its nuclear arsenal. The United States is more or less engaged in various frameworks, and it will have, out of this position of more or less engaged, it will have to compete with two near peer or peers or whatever you want to call them to implement its nuclear policy, which is damage limitation, and hence how do you pursue that against a large Chinese arsenal while at the same time doing it against Russia? Well, I don't actually know. I hope American strategists are much smarter than me. So I think this is going to be more and more a problem in the decades to come, not only the political but also the military strategic dimension. We will face questions towards how sustainable the various postures are, whether we want it or not. And then we add on top proliferation and all the other concerns. So yes, I do think it's going to be harder and harder. And if you look in the framework is not coming back. I think people who just wait for the next administration and then arms control will come back are badly misguided. It's gone.
Okay, thank you. Emmanuel, let me turn back to you. And let us focus a bit on the European ambition, because it's a part of the title of this panel. What does European ambition means in this field, in the nuclear domain? Is it about more to say in NATO? It is about building or strengthening our conventional capabilities while maintaining the transatlantic nuclear umbrella? Or do you think that it would be something else which is far more reaching than that?
Well, if you take in consideration the ambition of the European Union by the horizon of 2030, it's none of that. Because the ambition about the 7 priorities, I can read it, of course we all know it: air and anti-missile defense, artillery systems, strategic stocks of munitions, drone, anti-drone, military mobility throughout Europe, from west to east, of course, AI, quantic, electronics, cyber, and informational warfare, and of course the protection of our critical infrastructures, because this is a short-term ambition as we are facing a lack of this capability in regards to Ukraine. But we must think of the wars of the future. Again, we have the impression that on one side we are disturbed by the fact that there's no such thing anymore as a very robust, very concrete reboost in the New START regime and the limitation of arms of mass destruction. On the other hand, we do not say anything to China, which is rebuilding and which is gaining capability. So at one point, maybe we have to invent another form of treaty to liaise with China in order to prevent China to have the same number of nuclear weapons than Russia, which is, I think, one of its ambition, going from 250 to maybe 1,000 in the near future. And of course, let's also have in mind that when we speak about nuclear, we must not forget that there's been a disinhibition of the other weapons of mass destruction. We are focusing on nuclear, but a certain number of our adversaries are rethinking about bacteriological and chemical warfare. Where do we stand on that? Are we sure that we have a common position when it comes to prevent that from some of the countries with whom we are partnering? I have in mind, of course, in the Gulf and in the Middle East.
Okay, thank you. General Hodges, we mentioned about Ukraine and some of the guarantees. Do you think that Ukraine will prefer, instead of lacking a lot of guarantees from the West, will focus more on developing again their nuclear capabilities? It's a short answer, I would appreciate.
Yeah, of course, 45 seconds to go. The best arms control method will be to help Ukraine defeat Russia, crush them on the battlefield, and then Russia will not have money to spend on modernizing a nuclear weapon. They'll be spending the next decades trying to recover from getting crushed by Ukrainian armed forces. I hope Ukraine does not spend one penny on trying to rebuild a nuclear force. It is just so expensive. But I do believe that Ukraine is going to become the heart of Europe's defense industry probably within the next 10 years, and we will all benefit from that.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Two conclusions out of this, two very simple conclusions out of this panel. First, the umbrella remains in essence transatlantic, and the message is clear. We strongly believe in that. And the second one, I bought it from Dr. HOROVITZ. We need to invest in people who knows really this profession, this domain, the nuclear. Thank you very much. Please join me in an applause for our distinguished panelists today.